Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 3.4, factoring simple trinomials in the form x squared plus bx plus c. So factoring trinomials essentially is unmultiplying, kind of how we can think of it. So if you remember using FOIL, the FOIL method for multiplying our binomials or expanding our binomials, factoring is essentially the process of taking that finished product and pulling it back down into its original parts. So a simple trinomial is obviously a polynomial that has three terms. It's a quadratic expression where the leading coefficient of the number in front of the x term is 1. So here is our standard form, and the x squared term has a coefficient of 1. So to factor a trinomial into two binomials in the form x plus m and x times n, you need to find two numbers, m and n, that satisfy two specific conditions. One is that they have to multiply to give you the last number in the expression, and that's c, and then they have to add to give you the middle number of the expression, which is b. So let's take a look and walk through some of these examples. So if we start with x squared plus 5x plus 6, we can identify the a, the b, and the c in this trinomial, and sometimes that helps. So a equals 1, that signals that it is a simple trinomial. Here b is equal to 5, and c is equal to 6. So what we do is we try to find the two numbers that multiply to give 6 but add to give 5. So what I've done over here in the other side of the chart is I start to come up with all of the factors of 6. So 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and I check to see which of these pairs of numbers add to 7. Or add to 5, but if you see 1 times 6, that adds to 7. So this is not an option. But 2 times 3 factors of 6 also add to 5. So those are my special numbers. Once I have those, then to write it in factored form, it is just simply writing x plus 2 times x plus 3. And that's it. That's the factored form of the trinomial x squared plus 5x plus 6. So it seems pretty easy, but I'll tell you what makes this really easy is if you have a good grasp on multiplication tables, because then when you start thinking of your factors of bigger numbers, it starts to get a little easier and you get quicker at it. But overall, you will, with practice, start to see factors quicker. So in the next example, we have, again, a is 1. In this case, b is 7, and c is 10. So we need to start thinking of all the numbers, the pairs of numbers that multiply to 10, the factors of 10. And we have 1 and 10, but that adds to 11, so that doesn't work. And then we have 2 times 5, and that does add to 7, so that's what we want to use. Next thing we do is just write our factored form. So that's going to be x plus 2 and x plus 5. All right, so we'll keep going. X squared plus 4x minus 32. B is equal to 4, and C is equal to negative 32. So now when C's are negative, we have to consider that there are a couple of different options for each pair of numbers. So for example, if we look closely, remember C is negative 32. So I could have negative 1 times positive 32, because that equals negative 32. But I could also have positive 1 times negative 32. That also gives me negative 32. And then when we add them, either way, these two don't work. But for every pair of factors, because C is a negative number, you have to consider that at least one of the factors has to be negative. So again, we could have negative 2 times positive 16, or positive 2 times negative 16. Same thing with negative 8 times 4, or we could have positive 8 times negative 4. So then we have to look very closely to see which pairs of those numbers will add to give me a B of 4. So we see here at the bottom, it is positive 8 and negative 4. So if I go ahead and write out my trinomial in a factored form, it's going to be x plus 8 times x minus 4. So the work is all in trying to determine the factors, and then once you have them, it's just really quick and easy to write them out. So another example, x squared minus 5x plus 6. Again, our a is equal to 1, and so we know that this is a simple trinomial to work with. Our b is negative 5, and our c is 6. So here's also, because this is a negative here, the b is negative, we need to think of, well, we can have, again, a couple of different pairs. So we have 1 times 6, and that'll give us 6, positive 6, which is what C is. We have 2 times 3, which would also give us positive 6, which is what we have. But we also can add multiply two numbers that are negative. So negative 1 times negative 6, or negative 2 times negative 3, because those pairs also give me a C of positive 6. But I want to see which ones add to negative 5, because that's my B. And it seems like it's the last one here. So negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6, but negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5, which matches our B value. All right, so once we have that, we write it in factored form, x minus 2 and x minus 3. So we're just going to run through a bunch of examples, and again, we'll see how quickly you start to get the hang of this. Again, if you're really good with your multiplication tables, this will go a lot easier. So again, watch for the signs. The signs plus or minus in the trinomial tell you a lot about the factors you're looking for. So if C is positive, both numbers have to be the same. They can either both be positive or they can both be negative. And if C is negative, the numbers have different signs. So then again, you have to use the pairs where one's a negative, one's a positive, but then you reverse that as well. So here we have, in example 2, we have ax squared plus 2x minus 8. This is a simple trinomial. Here b is 2 and c is negative 8. So what I like to do is kind of do the work off in the side, at the side of the problem. So we have negative 8, and I start to think of the factors of negative 8. So I can do negative 1 and positive 8. I could do positive 1 and negative 8. I can do negative 2 and 4, and positive 2 and 4. So, positive 2 and negative 4. And I think those are all the factors. So now I'm going to go ahead and check each pair and what they add up to be. And then we'll find the ones that match. So negative 1 plus 8 is 7. 1 minus 8 is negative 7. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. And 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So the ones that match up are right here, because they multiply to give you negative 8 and they add together to give you positive 2. So now that I've identified the factors, I just go ahead and write them into this bracket format, and we're done. All right, so for B. So for B, B is equal to negative 3 and C is equal to negative 10. Again, I go off to the side and I start listing my multiples of negative 10. So I have 1 and negative 10, negative 1 and positive 10, 2 and negative 5, and I have negative 2 and positive 5. And those are all my factors for negative 10. I go ahead and I start adding them together to see what I get. 1 minus 10 is negative 9. Negative 1 plus 10 is positive 9. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. And negative 2 plus 5 is positive 3. So again, because my B is negative, we have to take this pair of factors right here. So we'll have x plus 2 and x minus 5. So for this one, we have a b of 5, and we have a c of negative 14. You gotta watch those signs again because c is negative. So we'll have 1 and 14, sorry, negative 14. We could have negative 1 and positive 14. And then we could have 2 and negative 7. We could have negative 2 and positive 7. And those are all my factors of 14. So let's go and check which pair adds up to give you 5. So I'm only going to check the 2's and 7's here. So 2 minus 7, that's going to give me negative 5. And negative 2 plus 7 is going to give me positive 5. So my choice here is negative 2 and 7. So I get x minus 2 times x plus 7. And we'll take a look here at D. And B is negative 1. And C is negative 12. So what are all the factors of negative 12? Well, we'll do 1 and 12. Sorry, negative 12. Negative 1 and positive 12. We have 2 and negative 6. Negative 2 and positive 6. 3 and negative 4. And negative 3 and positive 4. And I think those are all the factors of negative 12. So now which ones add to give you 1? So we can go through and add them all together, but now that you get the hang of it, I recognize here that negative 3 and positive 4 would add together to give me positive 1. So identifying those factors now, x minus 3 and x plus 4 is all you need to write in your brackets. So we have a couple of other examples, but essentially there is another method. It's not really that different. It just helps sometimes for people who are like really visual like me. And it's just called the X method because all we do here is we actually place the numbers in an X. So at the top goes our C value. So the C value goes here, and the bottom, the B value goes there. So just as like I've been writing it down right underneath the question, you can put it into an X like this. So for the example that we're looking at, C would be negative 8 up here, and B is 2. So what you're looking for in these spaces, again, are just the factors. So what numbers multiply to give you negative 8 and add to give you 2? Well, some of us are still going to have to list all the factors. So let's say negative 8 and 1, and positive 8 and negative 1, and 2 and negative 4, and negative 2, and positive 4, and we found it right here. So negative 2 and 4 are the factors, and we fill them into the sides of the X. And then after that, we just write it into our brackets in a factored form. So x minus 2 times x plus 4. So essentially, I think I would just call this X method a different way of keeping yourself organized. Either one is completely fine. And again, just practice with this factoring over and over again, and you start to get really quick at it. So take a look at your worksheet for this lesson, and let me know if you have any questions. All right, bye.